Hey guys, welcome back for today's world history lecture for Monday, April 27th. Got about 2.5 weeks left, and clock is winding down. So we have a Zoom meeting for 11 today. If you're watching this before the meeting, I included a list of the students that don't need to attend. Those that have turned everything in and have no issues. You guys can come to the meeting, those of you that are on the list, but you don't have to. But everybody else I want there so we can get things caught up and get everybody's work done. So continuing from last week, we left off talking about the escalation of the Cold War. We talked about the U-2 spy plane incident where an American spy plane was shot down over the Soviet Union. And then we talked about the failed Bay of Pigs invasion. Probably the biggest stain on the record of President John F. Kennedy. So today we will jump into continuing in 1961, the construction of the Berlin Wall. Now, the Berlin Wall is built right in the middle of the city. There's already a border. You know, as we know, Berlin is split in half, basically like Germany is. But Berlin is split in half, with East Berlin being Soviet ruled and West Berlin being, Allied, Democratic ruled. And there's some, mostly just like small fence there to divide the two, but it's not a real hard border. Like there's traffic going in and out of it. This is before 61, by the way, I'm talking about, like in the 50s. There's a lot of traffic going in and out. There's people in living in East Berlin that work in West Berlin, so there's traffic. There's families that are split. One side's on one side, and then the other part of the family's on the other side, and they can see each other. In the 50s, so that's how Berlin was. Now, as we know, with communism and with oppressive dictatorship that follows it, which is what East Germany and the Soviet Union were embarking on, the citizens of East Berlin are kind of looking out to their neighbors in West Berlin, like the grass is greener kind of thing. Like, man, it looks nice over there. It looks like, people have money, people have freedom. It looks, people are smiling. It's sunny over there. That's weird. It looks a lot nicer over there. So for a lot of the 50s, the East Berlin was going through what they call a brain drain, where a lot of the city's smartest and most capable people, especially and richest people, were fleeing East Berlin and living in West Berlin because it was simple. Just pack up and move across town. And they noticed that a lot of people were following this path, and it was really hurting East Berlin. And with tensions escalating, East Berlin and the Soviet Union knew they had to do something. With all these people defecting, they decided to make the border more difficult to pass over. So at midnight on August 15th, without really citizens had no idea this was coming for the most part, and the East Berlin dispatches all of its police officers, everybody they can get. And they station them all along the border throughout the city, which is about 80, almost 90 miles long. And they send in people to construct a physical barrier. They build a concrete wall about 12 feet tall. And so for the next couple days, this wall is being built and people are just watching it and they're not able to go anywhere because the police are all standing right there with guns. And if you try crossing it, you will get shot. And it's separate, it splits families apart. It loses some people's jobs because they had to commute into the other side of the city to work, and nobody can get past the wall. Like, nobody's getting through customs. There's no, using your passport or whatever they would have used to have a reason to go to the other side. You weren't leaving to go across the border one way or the other. This wall is 87 miles long. The whole length of the city, basically. Well, and then some. I mean, Berlin's not 87 miles long, but it stretches all across really any possible place to defect. And the fence or the barrier is actually built a little bit on the West German side. Like, if you're looking at exactly where the border is, they push the wall over to the West German side because they leave about 30 yards in some places. Now, as you can see in the top picture there, they built the wall right smack dab through the middle of a neighborhood. But on the bottom there's about a couple mile strip where they put the wall, and they left about 30 yards on one side. What you can't see there is there are, well, just on the other side, on the right side where the picture didn't get it, there's a huge ditch where vehicles can't travel. And then that strip there is filled with barbed wire and nails. So if you try running and trying to hop the fence, you're going to have to avoid nails. Also, like every mile, there's a watchtower with a guard and a gun. It's like a prison yard. Like, there are people on watch, and if you try and escape, you will get shot. Just another symbol of oppression and of the division of Germany and Berlin. And that wall will stand for 28 years, I believe. The Cuban Missile Crisis. Now we get to the peak of Cold War tensions. This is one of my favorite, this may be my favorite single event in all of history. Because when we talked about the Bay of Pigs, I talked about how big of a failure it was for the U.S. and how young and unproven President Kennedy was, and it made him look horrible, made him look like a buffoon. So Khrushchev, after that, thought, "Oh, I can take Kennedy. Like, he's just a young pup. He has no idea what he's doing. He looks dumb. I'm strong, powerful. I can handle this." Well, for as bad as the Bay of Pigs invasion was for Kennedy's legacy, the Cuban Missile Crisis was his moment. Like, this defines JFK. So the U-2 flights continue. Obviously, we're not going to stop spying just because it failed once. We send a U-2 flight over Cuba, which, remember, now Cuba is communist and they've aligned with the Soviets. Well, after America tries to invade Cuba, Castro asks Khrushchev if he would place Soviet nuclear missiles in Cuba, pointed at the U.S. so that way maybe it'll scare them and make them stop trying to kick out Castro, stop trying to invade. Khrushchev agrees, and he places some nuclear missiles in Cuba pointed at the U.S. Like missiles launched, ready to go. All you need to do is press the button. And this U-2 flight takes pictures and sees them. And they take them back to the president. They go, "You've got to see this. This is bad." And they show them their missiles. They're cocked and loaded. And they're pointed right at the U.S. And Cuba is 90 miles away from the U.S. And these missiles can travel a lot further than 90 miles. So another reason the Soviets did this was because they knew that America had nuclear missiles stationed in Turkey, which is pretty close to the Soviet Union. So now we both have nuclear weapons pointed at us, and Kennedy forces a blockade on Cuba, a naval blockade, takes ships, blocks any kind of sea traffic to Cuba, not allowing anything in or out, which in a lot of cases is an act of war. And then the Soviets send their own ships. And everyone at home is thinking, "Oh my gosh, we're going to war. We are going to go to nuclear warfare with the Soviet Union." Like people are listening to the radio every night. Ask if you can, if you have any family members that are alive now that were around for this, please ask them what they remember from this time. I talked to my grandparents. Like my mom was one, or no, sorry, my dad was one, and my mom wasn't born yet when this happened. But I talked to my grandparents about it, and man, they talk about how tense and horrified everybody was. This was a scary time because Khrushchev had built up this personality, or this idea about him, that Americans thought of him as this old guy with a real temper that had all these nuclear missiles and wasn't afraid to use them. And then we have Kennedy, who's young, and he screwed up a little bit in the past, so we're kind of nervous about how this is going to shake out. And then Kennedy's going on the radio saying, "We're not going to back down. We're gonna push this to the limit if we have to." And that's about all the American people knew. Back then, a lot of this, foreign policy and delegation with other countries that we are aware of today, citizens didn't know about that back in the 60s. Today, nothing happens or very little happens that the people don't hear about or know about. But back then, you were subject to just what was spread in the newspapers or through the radio waves. And so people were going to bed at night wondering, when I wake up in the morning, is there going to be, hellfire and brimstone all around me? Like, is this going to evolve into hell on earth? Like, it was tense. And there was like a 3 or 4 day span in, in that week of October 22nd of Kennedy didn't sleep. He stayed up all night, and they were planning, they were delegating. Like they said, he went 4 straight days with 0 sleep. He was either talking to Khrushchev or he was delegating with his cabinet about what to do. And I mean, they were close to launching these missiles. I mean, finger on the button, ready to push both sides. This was absolutely the closest we've ever come to nuclear warfare. We have, in the 50s, we built this system of homeland defense, this homeland defense system. And it rates things on a scale of 1 to 5 on like dangers or tensions of nuclear warfare. 5, it's done backwards. Like 5 is 5 is like right now, easy, not tense. It's a normal day, nothing's gone awry. And then 1 is button is pushed, missiles are launched, war is imminent, like it's started. So on that scale, the Cuban Missile Crisis was a 2, meaning we were 1 step away from all-out nuclear warfare. It's the only time in our nation's history we've been at a level 2. We've been at a level 3, which is a little less severe a couple times, but this was by far the closest we've ever come to possibly ending the world. Finally, the Soviets back down. Khrushchev agrees to remove the missiles from Cuba. But the U.S. had to publicly promise not to invade Cuba anymore, which they did. But what wasn't released to the media or to the people was that the U.S. also agreed to remove their nuclear weapons from Turkey, which they did, but they would end up putting them back years later. But that was the agreement, and finally, both sides took their finger off the button, and tensions de-escalated for a little bit. You can see that cartoon up there describing the situation. It's an arm wrestling match. Neither man's blinking, and they're both sitting on weapons of mass destruction. Luckily, cooler heads ended up prevailing, and we are around today because of it. So here's kind of a visual of the Cuban Missile Crisis. These Soviet medium-range missiles had, I don't know the exact distance, but they could reach the whole southeast of the United States, and they could get pretty close to Washington, D.C. Now, that's just their landing spot or their detonation point. The point of destruction, like if it, let's say it went all the way to, let's say they got into like the southeast corner of Kansas here. They shot to their limit. Let's say they, for some reason, the Soviets just hate corn or wheat or whatever we have, and they wanted to shoot and blow it up. Okay, explosion takes place here. Basically, everything east of Colorado would be toast. That's how big and powerful these weapons were. Like, just because it could only reach this part doesn't mean that the explosion would only affect this part. Majority of the country would have been decimated. And they had 5 nuclear missile bases in Cuba. So, yeah, the U.S. came close to nuclear warfare. It was so tense, and yeah, there's if I had you guys in a regular class, I'd show you. There were schools in the U.S. did like you guys know how we do tornado drills and fire drills, and now we do school shooter drills. Well, back then in the 50s and 60s, schools did bomb drills, nuclear bomb drills. And there are videos on YouTube of like nuclear bomb drill commercials. I highly recommend you look them up because now when we look at them, they're kind of funny. You know, they're telling kids to like put their books all on their desk and then crawl under their desk and then just pray for the best. Like a desk and a book is going to hold up on a nuclear weapon. But that's the only thing they thought they could do, so they did it. I highly recommend you look those up because they are, I mean, now they're humorous. Back then they weren't. But yeah, just like YouTube nuclear bomb drills. There's a 5-minute video that's really, really good on there on YouTube that is sure to get a chuckle. Now the essential question, why did the U.S. place a blockade on Cuba? Basically, why did the Cuban Missile Crisis happen in the first place? What caused it? What threatened the U.S. into placing a blockade on Cuba? So that'll be it for today's lecture. Again, Zoom meeting at 11 for those of you that need to get caught up on some work. Like usual, if you have any questions, please reach out to me, email me, I'll be around. I generally do a decent job of replying in a timely manner, so just let me know, and have a great day, guys.